Thank you for bearing with us.
Yes. All right. This is just a little bit about us, Home Tax Shield. We've only been around for a few years, but we are having a lot of fun in the property tax biz. Have very quickly figured out what we're doing around the data and technology side. But even though we as a company have been around for a few years, all the professionals that we actually hire to handle your cases have on average 17 to 21 years experience. That's really important. But so we're doing 45 counties in Texas, tons of property value, lots of different stories and experiences. And it gives us great purview. Our fees are super simple, super cheap. The reason we do this is because we really want everybody to have a chance to have a professional handle this for them. It's a little bit of a daunting thing. We'll talk about where and how that is. But anyway, this is us. So next slide. Okay, I always like to start a conversation on property taxes with the most important thing, which is dates. There's two dates in the property tax world that you do not want to miss ever, and that is the January 31st date to pay your bill, and then the May 15th date to protest your home. If you miss the January 31st, there's a whole lot of bad things that start happening to you, and you don't want to deal with that. And then if you miss the May 15th date, not a lot of bad things happen, except you cannot, under any circumstance, go back and retroactively file for past years. So you have totally missed your chance for that particular tax year if you miss the May 15th deadline. There's other important deadlines as well. Everybody's getting their value notices right now in most counties. Hearings typically happen from the May through July timeframe. Sometimes they go into August and September like they did last year. And then everybody gets their bill in November. It's due in January. But for those of you all that escrow, it's your mortgage company that typically pays the bill, usually in the December timeframe. So next slide. All right, here's some current stats. These are kind of fun and also scary. We're in a lot of counties, so I just picked a whole bunch of them just to give you an example of what we're seeing across the state in terms of 2023 values from the counties versus 2022. And pretty much everybody is up. Williamson is the only county that has gone down in value on average for single family residential, but most other counties are still, candidly, they're playing catch up. Most of y'all know that the real estate market from the first half of 2022 to now has gotten a little soft, a little slow, a little soft. But what happens in the tax appraisal world, the way that the schedules work and what the counties are supposed to do by law, they typically trail the real estate market by anywhere between 6 and 15 months. And so that creates this perceptive disconnect between, wait, I thought my values have gone down. Why is this still happening? It's because they're still using 2022 data because they have to by law. They can't use 2023 data until next year. So this is why we're still seeing a tremendous number of increases across the county. Next. Okay, so before we get into like some of the specifics around protesting and property taxes, I've found talking about this is really important. And that is because whether it's a homeowner, a real estate professional, agent, lender, anybody typically involves themselves in like one of these different values for a home. But when you look at this list, there are legitimately 10 different values for a home that are all correct, but they're all different. And so that's very confusing in a lot of respects. And so I tried to highlight them a little bit in colors, but the top three, this is where the real estate professionals live and breathe. This is all about the transaction. What's the buyer going to pay? What's the seller going to accept? How do we get a deal done? Right? That's what those are. Then to get a deal.
I'm so sorry. They can't see the slides again.
Oh, you know what?
I wonder if I took over the Zoom room to add people in, but I wonder if maybe me doing that.
Maybe there's a scroll at the top right here. On the Zoom, there's usually a
Yeah, I lost the
menu. Yeah, the
Yeah.
menu bar.
yeah, it all disappeared for me.
Right there, click on that.
Okay.
He has to do host from here though. Now, there you go, perfect.
And now we can go back down to share slide. That one.
You have to open the whole Zoom again.
Let's try
Oh,
this.
sorry.
It's all right.
Right here. Within this. This, the whole thing, make it bigger and then go back to share at the
Shared
bottom.
spot, shared.
Yep, there you go. Boom.
Okay, now,
From me.
And then go to view. Or top view.
or hit this guy, no, not there, get rid of that menu.
You just,
It's under here.
yeah,
Here, I got them.
I do this all the time.
Oh, sorry.
Slideshow right here. There you go.
All right, now go back a couple of slides. All right, well, let's give the people that missed it,
Sorry about
go back one more so people can see. There. See, just to see some of the increases. Can they see it?
They can see it.
They can see it.
Yes. Yay, thank you all for letting us know.
Okay, so these are some of the increases we were just talking about, but they're up quite a bit. So next slide.
That's,
Oh,
you got it from the mouse. That's what
You got it.
You don't want me to drive?
okay, so these are 10 legitimate values for your home. And they're all, oftentimes they're all different and they're all correct. Okay, so we talked about the buyer, seller, and the transaction values. And then the middle three are all about like consummating the transaction and then what happens after. And so you all know the mortgage company has to do an appraisal. The insurance company has to do their own kind of appraisal and they come up with these different values. So you're already, before you even get out of the transaction, you're already dealing with about 6 different values. And then you get into the tax world and we throw another 4 of them on you. Okay, so this is where the idea of what's my value, what's my market value, what's my appraisal value is very confusing. Because we have to talk about specifically just the tax values when you're talking about property taxes. So a lot of these other values don't really have any relation to these down here. They might be close or similar, but they're technically the way that they're done, the way a mortgage appraisal is done is very different than the way that a tax appraisal is done, the way the county does it, okay? So very important to understand that. We'll talk about each one of these things, but there's 4 of them. So next slide. Okay, so I tried to capture these 4 property tax values in as simple a concept as I can. So your tax appraisal value that you get from the county is actually derived from 2 other values that they start with. They look at each home from an equity value standpoint and a sales value standpoint. And long story short, but they have their systems that mass appraise the whole county every year. If you think about it, it's a really daunting task. Like they have a tough job, they really do. And so they have their systems, they shove all their data that they can get into their systems to produce both of these values for your home. Sometimes they're the same, most of the time they're different up here on the equity and the sales value side. Okay, but either way, then they look at both of those and they come up with a singular appraisal value for your home, and that's what you get on your notice. So that's the whole reason they call it a notice, because they're notifying you that this is what we think your home is valued at for tax purposes. So, and then after the notice value comes out, the notice appraised value, on that same sheet, you might see what's called the assessed value. Well, the assessed value is what they're going to tax you on, and the difference between the two, if you have a difference, is almost entirely due to exemptions. And so from a picture standpoint, I found this very helpful because we protest the stuff up top. We don't protest the stuff down here. We don't protest exemptions, or we don't protest your assessed value, because those are determined by your exemptions. It's this stuff up here that we go after and we protest and we try to find, did the county make a mistake on your home? Where did they make a mistake? What do we need to fix? And so forth. And so this is one point of confusion for some folks, because they see the big value and then they see their smaller assessed value, and they want that to go down because that means I'll pay less taxes. But that's not how the game is rigged. We have to protest this stuff. And so you can see, even if you have exemptions, homestead over 65, if we can lower these and then apply your exemptions, you're going to pay less. Okay. So I put some numbers on here just so you can kind of see a general example in terms of like how property taxes are calculated. And it's just your ultimate, your assessed value times your tax rate. Now, on your tax bill, each of us have anywhere between 4 and 7 different taxing entities like the school and the police and the fire and the EMS and the roads and whatever else. And each one of those taxing entities actually has a different rate. They get a little piece of the rate, and they accept or don't accept certain exemptions. And so it gets very complicated below this, but this is a really simple example just to understand how property taxes are calculated. All right, next. Okay, on the exemption thing, this has been probably the biggest point of confusion that we hear about from both homeowners and real estate professionals the last 2 years. And the reason is because the homestead, people have believed that if I have the homestead, I have the cap. And that's not true, unfortunately. So let's go through this. The homestead exemption, which is absolutely something that everybody should file for if you qualify for it. And the only qualifications are you have to own the home and live in the home. It has to be in your name and you got to prove residency. But if you qualify for it, you should get it. And you get 2 things when you get the homestead exemption. You get a what I call a value credit. That credit is applied to your assessed value. Okay, so it's even after your assessed value. It's at that point of determining what your assessed value should be. It goes down. And then the second thing you get ultimately is the cap. But what happened a couple of years ago when the legislature met and accelerated the homestead exemption filing application, they said you can now, instead of waiting until January 1st, the next year after you buy a home, you can apply now and get approved now. That created a lot of confusion because it did not accelerate the cap at all. It only gave homeowners the ability to get a prorated portion of the credit in the year you buy the home. So if you close on a home and move in on the home on July 1st, you can file for the exemption right then, that day, and they will approve you as of July 1st. And then you would get half of the credit in the first year. And the next year, you get the full credit, and every year thereafter, you get the full credit. This is one of the things, by the way, that the legislature is talking about increasing this year, and it's probably going to go to 70. It's great. It saves us all money. The cap, though, in order for you to have a cap on your home, you have to establish a base year. And the legal language says you have to live in the home from January 1 to December 31st. That's your base year. So if you move in on January 2, then your whole first year is not your base year and you get no cap. The next year is technically your first year and your base year, but your base year isn't capped. You have to cap on the base year. So it's not until the 3rd year you get the cap. This is why there's a disconnect in the delay in how this is supposed to happen. So when people bought in 2021 and protested last year, looked at their tax bill and why did I not get the cap? This is why. All right. So for this year, people that bought in 2022 will not have the cap. They didn't have it last year. They won't have it this year, but they will get it next year. So very confusing part of the way the homestead exemption is working. Also, we've seen because of the changes in the legislation and allowing the acceleration of your ability to file for the cap, it has caused some problems with a lot of counties' data systems. And they're not really showing the correct data on the websites right now in a lot of cases. So I'd be careful what you look at and believe until they fix it. All right. Okay, so how to lower your property taxes. So we talked about that basic math in the equation, right? Your appraised value, your assessed value, and your tax rate. So when you think about the components of that math, like you need to go after your appraised value and or your tax rate. So the tax rate thing is simple. Let's get that out of the way. You have to vote against tax increases. That's what you have to do to affect your tax rate. On the appraised value, you have to protest. And this is what we recommend people do every year, just to make sure that they're getting a fair appraised value. You can obviously, we talked about filing for any exemptions that you qualify for. That's super important as well. Those are like free coupons from the county, so I don't know why anybody wouldn't pick up a free coupon. I certainly would. And then the worst case scenario, which unfortunately is actually happening in some cases, is people are having to move to cheaper areas to lower their tax bill. Those are the only ways you can lower your taxes in Texas on the property side. So why protest though? Everybody thinks of the first one. It's a no-brainer. We all want to save money, no doubt. However, when you look beneath the surface as to why somebody gets up enough gumption to protest, this is really why. It's the only way that you can know that you're not being overtaxed. If you don't protest, you might look at your number and you might say, that feels good to me, but okay, it might feel good, but what if I told you it might actually be wrong? Right, so protesting is the only way to accomplish number two. Like I talked about before, the counties have an incredibly challenging job. With what they have to do, they actually do a pretty good job. They're not nefarious. They don't come after you. People get really angry and emotional about this. They do a good job with what they've been given to do, but they do make mistakes, and they do make them pretty frequently. So we go in to fix those. As long as we live in this country, we never want to be taxed unless we have a voice. Protesting is your voice. So if you're choosing not to exercise your voice, it's like not voting in an election. And then the last one, which I like to remind people of, is protesting is actually a team sport. So if your neighborhood, if you're the only one in your neighborhood that protests your home, nobody else protests, you're going to have a really difficult time finding success in getting and keeping your value down. So everybody needs to do that in order to make sure everybody's fair, because even if Joe, your neighbor, looks at his number and feels comfortable with it, it could be hurting you. And so we encourage everybody to try to get their neighbors and friends to protest, because it's, again, only way to answer number two, and it's a team sport at the end of the day. Thanks. Okay, so this is a little bit of detail on how to protest well. It's sort of a checklist. There's a lot of things beneath this, but let's talk about it. So the first one, like I mentioned before, do not miss that filing deadline. They will not do anything if you miss the deadline. And then there's, back on the values, we talked about an equity value and a sales value. Those are two arguments, different arguments that you can make in a protest. Most people only think about the sales argument. They go get me some comps, see what my neighbors bought their home for, and use it to lower my value. That's the most common one, but people forget that there's a whole equity. The county data is about an equity grid. So unlike the sales comps, where you can only look at what homes sold in the neighborhood, on the equity comp, I get to look at every home. And so now I get to go find which home is like mine that the county may have valued lower that I can use to lower my value. It's a much harder game to play, because you have to go get all of the county's data. Not just a select number of comps. On both sides, though, you have to adjust the comps, and I'm going to show you a picture of what that means. That is what most non-professionals completely miss, and this is where, even if you're successful protesting your home without doing that, you're kind of getting a little lucky. Okay, I'll show you what that's all about. Then you got to look at both of those arguments, sales or equity, and choose which one or both, and kind of strategize how you're going to do this. The gather photos and do repair estimates is a common thing too, that people think about, but the reality is, unless you had major damage to your home, you cannot use this very often. It doesn't work unless you have really big damage, and we'll talk about that a little bit later too. You got to schedule a hearing. I think Omar's got one already, May 12th. And then you got to attend the hearing, of the informal hearing, which is sometimes they'll call you up or want you to come in and talk before the hearing to try to get an agreement in place. But if you don't like what they're offering you, then you can say no, and then you go to the formal hearing, and that's what's typically like it's a little bit of like a jury panel. There's typically 3 tiers from the neighborhood, from the area, the appraiser from the county, and then you you argue against each other, and then they listen to see whose argument's the best. And so that's the ARB, that's the formal hearing. And overall, we've added it up, and kind of the averagely skilled homeowner is going to spend that much time over 2 to 3 months. So it's not the thing that's easy is filing a protest. That's the easy part, just filing. But you gotta do all this stuff to actually protest well, to protest successfully. Next. So when I talk about adjusting comps from a tax standpoint, I know y'all probably do this from a buy and sell transaction standpoint, but the difference here is that each county has their own philosophy on how they make these adjustments. So if you don't know your county's specific philosophy for every adjustment, then you are going in a little unarmed. And what I highlighted here for the subject property is there's some comps here. It's valued at 626. There's some comps that look like they'd be really helpful, right? But after you do all the adjustments, the numbers all went up and they were less helpful than you thought they might have been. This is why it's very dangerous for a homeowner to go into a protest with raw sales comps. Because they might bring a raw sales comp in that they think, because it's sold for whatever, is going to help them. But once the county takes that comp, which by the way, they didn't have because it's a non-disclosure state, once they take that comp and they put it in their systems and make all the adjustments, it very well could go up and hurt the homeowner. So you got to be very careful taking raw sales comps or CMAs into a protest for that reason. All right. Much better to do a professional full adjustment from a tax standpoint to make sure you're using a really good quality product. Next.
What do you mean that the county doesn't have the public record of that?
A non-disclosure state in Texas means that any real estate transaction is not required to be reported to the county. So they don't have sales data.
So if it wasn't on MLS,
They're not supposed to have MLS. There was a lawsuit a couple of years ago with Travis County. I think there's an ongoing one with Hayes County right now. They sometimes try to find ways to get data, sales data, but they're not supposed to have it. Makes their job a little harder, and they'll, they gripe and complain about that. But so kind of a wrap up before we open it up for Q&A. This is a short list. It's a full slide. It's a short list of what we keep hearing that is in the kind of myth or misconception world. So we just talked about the CMA is a good tool to fight property taxes. It can work, but man, it is actually a dangerous tool. So be very careful with it. A lot of homeowners look at their neighbor's value and it's lower than theirs, and then with theirs lower, again, same kind of dynamic in misconception. You have to go adjust everything to make it a true comp the way the tax authorities do it for it to work. So that's not necessarily true. On the repairs, new paint, I need a new air conditioner, my countertops are old. Guess what? Sorry, the county doesn't care. You have to have a severely dilapidated home or a home that was grossly overrated from a condition standpoint, and that doesn't happen very often. So you can't bring these little, usually has to be in the tens of thousands of dollars of repair before that will actually help.
And does that count just for year one? Or will they say if you have a foundation problem and you get a discount and then you don't fix it the next year, does that count? Or is it only a one?
If they add it back, that happens. So if you if you need to replace your roof or you have a big foundation issue, it's going to be $40,000 or $50,000. You can take that estimate in and they'll reduce your value by around that typically. If you fix it first before January 1, and then you want to take your paid estimate in, you've already fixed it. So your house isn't actually worse in value, so they won't give you that. So it has to be unfixed repairs that have not yet been done. Can't take in your receipts from what you spent.
Yeah, the more money you spend, the more tax.
Yes, because you're improving your home. I know, it's fun. This is the common one. We talked a little bit about this. I have a homestead, so I'm protected. I don't need to protest. I think we've gone through the math there that you can still save money even with an over 65, right? And it's a team sport. It's better for everybody. Find a firm like ours that doesn't charge you hardly anything to do a good job at this, and let them do it. This was a common one here, a little bit less than the last, but protesting hurts my schools and police and fire. It doesn't, because the state backs the budgets. We've got a lot of cash down the street at the state, and if there's ever a shortfall in any of those entities, the state will usually step in and make sure they're good. So it won't hurt them. This was a common one that still kind of gets around. It's going to hurt my resale value. If a homeowner really believes that, then I would suggest they need to find a new real estate agent, because most real estate agents do not use the tax roll to determine the market. If you're working with a real estate agent that's using the tax roll to determine what you should sell or buy for, go find another one. Again, those are those two completely different values generated in different ways for different purposes. The county might raise me if I go in and protest. That actually has some legitimacy to it, because a decade or two ago, that used to happen. And that used to be allowed, and that the law shut that down. So it is virtually no risk other than your time to go in and protest at all. And then protesting is easy. I talked about this. Filing the protest is easy, but if you do it correctly and fully, then protesting is actually pretty arduous. It's a lot of work. I think that's it. Next. All right. 120.
Good. So we do have a handful of questions that are
Great.
in the chat, plus I have a few questions as well. So one that has come up a lot, I'm in the chat room right now. How do you get the county data for equity approach?
Good question. So there's two ways. You can go to the county website and look up every home in your neighborhood. All the data is public. Everybody, unless you have asked the county to mark your data as confidential, which usually happens when you're police or a judge or something like that. All of our data is public on every county. And you can go find out all sorts of things. Now, the data they display on the county websites is limited, so it doesn't cover every single adjustment and every single thing, but you can get a good collective data set about your neighborhood or your neighbors and figure out, okay, where do they value them? But you have to, again, you got to get the square foot, get the bed pass. How many garages do they have? Is it 2-car or 3-car? Do they have covered porches, not covered porches? Do they have a pool? Do they have, like, on down the list? What kind of roof do they have? Because you have to know all of those things in order to make all those adjustments. So you can go to the website. The Freedom of Information Act allows you to send in an official request to the county and ask for all of the data, and that's what we do. I don't know what a homeowner would do with all the county's data, but you can send that in, and by law, they're required to give you the entire county's data set in 14 days.
Okay,
Yeah, which you now don't have. 14 days left.
14, well, to the deadline, you just have to get it all in before the hearing, so you can try to use it before your hearing.
okay. One thing that I think will be helpful for a lot of these questions in the chat is tell us like what your company does and the value that you can provide to a homeowner so that they don't have to go through the protest process themselves if they wanted to offload the task of doing it. And then some of these questions would apply if they want to do it themselves. What's the DIY version of protesting versus what's the ease and convenience and fees and value for hiring your company and what you offer?
Yeah.
So like maybe just speak to that for a minute.
Okay.
And does everybody hear me? Do you think, I want to make sure everyone can hear me, ask that question.
Right into the sector. Okay.
So that the list that I showed you about how to protest well, where don't miss the deadline, create the sales grid, create the equity grid, evaluate both and choose your case and schedule time with the county, and all of that is basically what we do. So the only in engaging with us, the only thing the homeowner has to do is find their property on our website and sign it up. That's it. So we take all of that complication and kind of put it on the side into our world so that the homeowner can basically just root for us and wait for us to bring back a result.
But they can't file the protest themselves, because if they file the protest themselves, you have to file the protest for them.
Yes. So in that don't miss the May 15th deadline kind of idea. And in case anybody here is in Hayes County, just everybody knows that May 18th is the Hayes County deadline. There's always a little bit of, we always say May 15th, but every county is a little different. In that same vein of don't ever miss the deadline, there's a corresponding rule that says you get one chance to file a protest every year, one shot. So if you take your one shot, you can't, and if you don't like what the county gave you, you can't come running to us and say, help me, because you've already taken your shot. So we can't take another shot for you. So you got to think really hard about whether or not you want to handle this all yourself or hire a pro to do it.
But if you want a pro to do it, then you have to ask the pro to do it to begin with.
Yes.
You can't file it for yourself and then hand it off.
Correct.
Okay,
Is May 15th the deadline for them to hire you?
Yes.
Okay.
It is. We take signups all the way up until about 11:45 PM that night.
so you're not going to bed until late. Okay.
It's kind of crazy.
And then, just thought, we're talking about home tax shield, someone says, are there any guarantees that home tax shield offers, like, as if they file a protest and there's no change, do you still pay something? Like, what are the
Yeah.
fees associated with that process?
So if on the guarantee thing, if any tax professional guarantees you anything about the result or a reduction or whatever, it's technically illegal, number one, and two, you should run for the hills. There is no tax professional, I don't care how talented they are, knows what's going to happen until they step into that hearing and step into that conversation with the county. They really have no idea. So don't listen to those kind of guarantees. In terms of like our business economics, that's why we charge the $30 up front. That is what is the cost for us to do all of that stuff, file the protest, create all the data products, send in a professional to deal with the county for it and all that jazz. So anybody that signs up with Home Tax Shield is out $30 just to play, right? And then that 30% is when we save you money. And no, we don't offer a guarantee on the $30 because we believe, and these are the customers we want, we believe that answering that question around, am I getting overtaxed or not, is totally worth $30. Probably a lot more, honestly. But if a homeowner, if that's not worth anything to a homeowner, then there's probably other firms that might do the traditional, don't pay me anything and unless we save you money, and then I'll take 40 or 50%. That's the traditional kind of pitch, which we philosophically just don't like. It's too much. 40 to 50% is way too much of the savings.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. I think that answers that question. Okay, so another question kind of related to the homestead cap and then like whatnot. Why are some homestead cap loss values more than others? Sure.
So the way that the counties present the data about the homestead cap is pretty confusing. Okay, so I'll try to walk through a audible example. So if your home, if you've got a $500,000 home and you have the homestead exemption, okay, and the county comes in this year and you have the exemption, you've had it owned it for 10 years. County comes in and says, well, before we go to the county, if you have the exemption and you have a $500,000 home, it doesn't even matter what the county says. You already know you will not pay any more taxes than $550,000 value. You already know that. So, but let's say the county comes in and says, we don't think your home is 550. We think it's worth 600 this year. Okay, so they put the appraisal value at 600. Your assessed value, because you're capped, is at 550. So you're going to pay 550. But there's a $50,000 difference that year is going to be presented in your data. So you're going to see 600 and then a 50 and then a 550, right? Well, that $50,000 difference, the next year, if the county doesn't raise you at all and leaves you at 600, so yay, they didn't raise me, but guess what? Your 550 is going up to 600 because that's the next 10%. They're allowed to raise you by 10% without even raising your value. So that's how the homestead cap works, and that's why you see some of these different numbers on the websites. And that homestead cap amount, I think Travis County calls it an adjustment, a value adjustment. That's if you are past your homestead on the appraisal, that's how much beyond it you are.
Greg, you mentioned that there are common mistakes from the CAD.
Yeah.
But you didn't mention what they were. What are they?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. There's some of us in the real estate market where it is really, really important to protest. Okay, probably the most important people out there that need to protest are the people that moved into a brand new home that's a new build. Okay, and the reason is because up until that moment in time, the county had no idea. The county knew that there was nothing but dirt on the ground. Now you got a home, but they don't know every particular aspect of that home. Okay. And so the first year, unless they send somebody out and you let them in the door, I know that they do visit sometimes, they have to guess. they'll try to get it from the builder, or they'll try to guess based on what else they see or know. And so when they're guessing at how many square foot do you have, how many bedrooms is it, they're guessing. And again, it's kind of the best they can do. They're not being nefarious. They're just trying to get something in, and they know that if you see something wrong, you're allowed to protest. So they're gonna guess, but that's probably the number one most frequent situation where errors are everywhere, okay? Even if a home has been around for a while, we still see situations where the county has 4-bedroom and 3-bath, and it's really a 4-2. Or it's a 3-2, right? There's a whole extra bedroom, there's a whole extra garage, or the square footage is off, or something like that. And so they use satellite imagery, they do drive-bys, and they do all sorts of tactics and things to try to get to the full truth of things. And again, they're not nefarious, they do a decent job at it, but that's where they make a lot of mistakes. So new builds, new homeowners, like we talked about, you're not protected by any exemptions or caps. So man, those first 2 years when you own a new home, the year you buy it and the next year after that are super important to protest. And make sure that your value is not getting out of control, because the third year, you're gonna get capped on whatever you accepted the second year. You want that to be super low. In the same vein, for folks on the over 65 exemption, the year you turn 65, you can apply for the exemption. And what that does is it caps or freezes your school taxes. Most of the rest of your taxes are not capped or frozen, but your school taxes, which are like half of our tax bill, are frozen. But what the county does is they will look at the year you turn 65 and the year you turn 66, and they'll take the lowest of the 2 years. So a lot of people that get the over 65 are like, I got the exemption, I'm out, I don't need to protest. And it's like, yeah, but if we get it down for you again next year, they're gonna lower your freeze base. So give us a chance, to get that down. But that's a really good question.
Okay, question for you. I feel like this is a very common situation. If you've lived in your home for a really long time, I'm gonna read his exact question because I think it applies. Our tax value has been raised by 10% max year over year. They have been in homestead, but the tax value is still about $300,000 lower than what the market value is. Like, what if they were saying, like, let's sell your house? They would sell it for $300,000 more. So is it worth protesting even if the assessed value is way low compared to the market value?
Yeah, so that's a great question, especially right now.
I'm in that situation. Gina's in that situation. David here is.
We're seeing, in some cases, ginormous homestead cap amounts, huge gaps between the appraised value and the assessed value. And so I always want to start out the answer to this question with, in those situations, the chances of us saving you money on your tax bill are almost zero, okay, that year. We still think it's worth protesting, however, and these are the reasons. One is if you're, let's say you, a few years ago, you were at a $500,000 assessed value. Now they got you at $1.5 million, and you have almost $1 million of gap between your assessed and your market. And you're like, I can't lower that to save money. That's probably true for a number of years. But if you don't, there's two bad things that happen. Number one is you're agreeing to let the county keep your value elevated, okay? And possibly even raise it from there further while your 10% per year assessed value starts to catch up, which means it's going to take you a lot longer to catch up and save money than by not protesting, unless you, and on the other hand, if you do. So it helps put pressure, and you can accelerate the moment in which you can save money in your taxes. Again, I personally think that's totally worth $30 a year. That's why we do that. Even for people that we know we won't save you any money, let us go after it. The other reason is more for your neighbors, and it's the whole team sport idea. Like, for the people that are over 65 or have a big cap and say, I don't really care, I don't want to worry about it. Well, not every one of your neighbors has an exemption. And so by letting your value stay up there, you're actually hurting your neighbors. Okay. And again, those two reasons I think are worth $30, in my opinion, to do that for a homeowner every year, even though you're not going to save any money, maybe for quite a few years.
So I have a follow-up question to that.
Yeah.
So say you're in that situation where the assessed value is way low, you got homestead,
Mhm.
and then you decide to sell. the house. So then we know the county is potentially gonna get that data. So in that gap year that you sell, does the county automatically raise the value to what it sold for? If they find out that value and then that new buyer needs to put homestead on it, but then that there's a huge gap and
Yeah.
I know I always try to make sure the title company prorates and adjusts properly depending on which side I'm representing. So that
Right.
we get the right prorations, because I'm seeing that a lot right now.
Yeah.
So need to speak to that.
Yeah, so this is the flip side of the homestead exemption, why you don't get the cap as a new buyer. It's the flip side of that coin, is what happens to the old buyer or the seller who had an exemption. So unfortunately, we see a lot of different counties handling this differently. So it depends on the time of year you sell. So the homeowner if you sell in January or February, there's a much higher likelihood that the new owner is going to come in, get a homestead exemption applied even before April, before value notices get sent out. Okay. So in those cases, you would lose it. You know, you still are responsible for whatever amount of time as a seller that you own the home that year, technically. But typically after April 15th, which is when they try to send notices out, and certainly after May 15th, you get later in the year, transactions after that, most counties will just stick with the seller's tax and exemption setup. Okay, so that means that the buyer will actually be getting some benefit, right, from the homestead, because they can file for homestead. But we do see some counties applying caps in that year to those buyers. The problem is it's not consistent and it's not all counties. So I personally, if I was buying a home and I was buying a home with that kind of a situation, I would not want my property taxes escrowed based on the idea that I'm going to get to keep the previous owner's cap. That's a super dangerous situation to assume that that's going to happen, because we see it not happen all the time. And then you got a buyer who's caught off guard with an extra huge tax bill that they weren't preparing for. And that's a mess.
Craig, speak to the difference with the success fee in the previous question where the appraised value was X, but then the taxable value was Y. And if we don't actually save them money on the taxable value, what happens to the 30% success fee?
Yeah, that's a good question, because in the history of property tax firms, there are firms out there even still today that will charge you just for the reduction. So they'll just take your reduction, multiply it by your tax rate, and call that savings. I understand why they're doing that. They're technically being hired to get you a reduction and they want to charge for that. But the ones that call it tax savings, that's not fair, because it's not tax savings. So when we have a situation where your appraised is way above your assessed, let's say it's excessive, like $1.5 million versus your assessed at 500,000. If we lower your $1.5 million to $1 million, we didn't save you any money in your taxes, but we delivered a $500,000 reduction for you, right? Which is going to help you save money in future years, but we don't charge for that at all. There's no success fee.
And then just to confirm, because a lot of people in the chat have asked about like the savings, like, or of the exact fees to like itemize it out.
Mhm.
So our buddy Lance said, if you owe $10,000 and you guys reduce it by $9,000 and you save $1,000, then they as the buyer or as the person being protested on
Yeah.
behalf, they would pay you $300 and then they would save $700.
Correct.
For simple math. Okay, so that answers that question.
Yep. That's right.
Thank you for putting that in the chat.
Would they pay 330 or 300?
They would have already paid the 30.
Okay, gotcha.
But in terms of calculating the 30% success fee, yeah, so in that case, and this is where I had homeowners today kind of trying to help them understand. He paid us quite a big nut for our success fee, and it was big enough where he was like, well, this is a cash negative thing for me. Like that my cash is going out the door. I'm like, hold on a second. We saved you $6,700 on your tax bill. And even though he paid us a couple grand or whatever, which is a lot of money, like you're cash flow positive with us by like $4,500.
And you got the value down.
And the value's down, right? So I totally get I get that sentiment sometimes, but it is basic math. And so we're trying to set for every homeowner, we're trying to set up a situation where you pay us $30, and even if you pay us 30% on some savings, that net, you're cash flow positive with this relationship every year.
And you didn't have to do the work.
And you didn't have to do any work.
Because I personally protested year over year for our own personal property and our rental property. And then once the market kind of got out of control, I just like turned it over and said, I'm not gonna do it anymore.
Yeah.
So question for you, I know we're running short on time and I wanna make sure we get most of these questions answered. So if someone bought a home last year, I know in years past, the county will honor the sale and the value came in above what their sales price was.
Yep.
I know in the past, the county would honor that as the sales price. They would lower the value of that sale price. Is that still happening? Is there any instance where the county is considering the fact that the market values have dropped in the second half of this last year versus the first half of the year?
Yeah.
What are you seeing, or have you not had experience yet with last year's shifted market to know?
Yeah, so as of today, we haven't protested, been to any hearings. I don't have any anecdotal data from 2023. Last year was fascinating because last year was one of the first years that we've ever experienced where many counties did not accept the sales contract. They added a sales growth factor. In some cases, counties added a monthly sales growth factor of 2 to 3% per month on the price. And so if you paid, $500,000 on July 1st, they took, July, and they added 2% every month, and they gave you, they would accept that. I think this year is going to be a little bit different because they did that last year because the market was so hot. The prices, they had a hard time keeping up with prices. I think the market, although it's not super bad per se, it softened, and I don't think that case is there anymore. It's actually one of the reasons you see Williamson down 10%. Williamson is actually pretty darn good at the data. They really are.
But isn't it true though that somebody could, for a $500,000 house, somebody could pay $2 million just because they want it? Versus if somebody's in a distressed situation, they may sell it for $250.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean that that's your real fair value from a taxation perspective. So what somebody paid for it is just what the market is demanding or what somebody's willing to take for it. But it doesn't mean that that's necessarily what the county is going to value that.
That's right. And so that is a proof that the county doesn't even see the actual market value as the market value for tax purposes.
Right.
They will either like raise it or lower it, or they'll apply their county thinking and logic to that transaction and either raise it or lower it or accept it. That's a good point. But in general, historically, again, when you buy a new home or buy a home, whether it's new or not, because it's a non-disclosure state, the county doesn't know what you paid, and so they have to guess. And so they're gonna guess mostly high and mostly wrong. So it is one way to help fix that problem, is to just show them what you paid.
Okay, I think this is a quick one to answer, but somebody said the value went up by 32,000. Is that an amount that you handle and will protest? Like small, big, you'll do anything?
Anything and everything. All the values in Williamson that are going down, we're protesting a ton of properties in Williamson. Again, whether the county comes out with a raised value for you or a lowered value for you or the same value for you, it doesn't matter. Let us figure out if they made a mistake that year, and every single tax year is different. It's not just a mistake about your home or the data about your home. It's a mistake about the market potentially. Because so like the question we should all be asking about Williamson being down 10.1% is that enough? It might be. It may not be.
Because in some reports, the market overall is down 19%. So,
Right.
Is there opportunity there? Okay.
That's right.
Lori asked that, kind of specific, but I think it could apply for other people when they're just looking for comps. I think she might be doing it on her own.
Mhm.
She found the exact floor plan with a larger yard and a lower appraisal. She was planning on using that along with other comps. Do you think that's an okay strategy?
It is. She's got to take a really close look at, even though it has the same floor plan, like there's always finishes.
Right.
There's other things that they look at. And then deep in the county data, the county will apply, condition codes and neighborhood codes and other kind of codes that are cryptic ways for them to compare homes to homes. And so you kind of got to dig into that to make sure it's as close to truly being a similar home. Not necessarily in your eyes as the homeowner. You have to get on the county side and look at it from a county perspective.
So like in that same line, Lawrence asked about an abandoned rundown home in his neighborhood. Can he use that as his, like, as a comp? And your answer would be,
That would be quite tough. If there's walls and you can do the square footage comparison and, then technically, yes. But they're also, every home, they're gonna adjust according to the condition or the situation. So they may have already used that home in their models and adjusted for them correctly, such that it may not help you.
so like, I remember when I used to do this on my own and I would pull my own sales comps, because, I've got the skill to do it, right? And I would take my comps in every once in a while, or a handful of times, the county would be like, that comp's not good, that comp's not good, because it's the condition, the class.
Yeah.
And you don't see, and I can't see even as a real estate agent, I'm not able to see the class that the county's
Right.
classifying. So they would throw out what looked like very reasonable comps to me because it was built with a different condition class. And then it would be like a non-usable comp, and I would be real frustrated.
Yep, that's a great
Like,
example.
but it's like 20 years old too, and it, like, at that point, a 20-year-old home compared to a 20-year-old home, no matter how it was built, should be kind of similar, not still so different.
Right.
And so,
Oh.
can you protest the land market value?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We are seeing land values explode this year. They didn't do it much last year. There was a lot on the improvements, and this year the land values are going way, way up in a lot of places, almost to ridiculous amounts. What we find is the counties, so the short answer is yes, you technically can, and it is probably one of the hardest things to do.
And that's why they raise it high, so that, because you can't protest it as easily.
Yeah, that's not why they raise it high. They raise it high because they are trying to peg the actual land value in the market to determine land value. So they're really trying to do the right thing. But what we find is that a lot of counties, remember, their task is every year from January to March, they got to value the whole county. So a lot of times the county won't do every single thing every year. They'll do land every 2 or 3 or 4 years. And they'll come back over. So you may see your land not change. And all of a sudden 1 year, it's like, what the heck? It just doubled. That's why. Sometimes that happens.
Okay, somebody has, Aretha has a hearing scheduled, to appear by video. So what could she expect? And then how long are the protest video meetings?
Mhm.
I filed a protest because my square footage that they used for the assessed value is slightly wrong.
Mhm.
Would bringing my survey from the builder be good evidence, to getting the square footage changed?
Yeah, so when it comes to fixing the data in the county's role, square footage, bed baths, or whatever, you have to have an official survey or appraisal done by a licensed appraisal that shows exactly what the situation is and how it differs from the county. So you definitely have to have that. Pictures or anecdotes or even an MLS listing, none of that matters. None of that's legitimate data. So you definitely an official survey and an official appraisal report that shows the home on that. But so if you have that though, then yes, that typically can be helpful in fixing a problem. Oddly, sometimes that's actually pretty hard to get fixed. And they won't, so you have to have a lot of information and a lot of defendable information about that.
Yeah, so go on the new build. So my particular home is a new build. Versus last April. And they got my square footage wrong. They underestimated my square footage.
Mhm.
So if I protest, is it possible that now they will fix my square footage and therefore raise the value?
No, unless you happen to bring something to them
Okay,
that shows them your actual square footage. And like we talked about, protesting every year is risk-free. They can't raise you that year. But if you come in trying to get a reduction on your home and you give them something that shows them that you have more square footage, or you actually have a pool in the backyard, they didn't know about it because you showed them a picture of your home and like, wait, what's that? They can't raise you that year, but they certainly might take a note for next year and go fix it And then next year you'd see that show up.
But in hiring you guys, like, there's no way for them to know that they're off square footage.
There's not, unless you give us something
Right.
that inadvertently discloses that, then there's no way to, or if you let them into your house or let the, sometimes they have drive arounds. That's the only other way they find out. Hopefully your neighbor wouldn't report you.
Good deal.
Yeah. Yeah. Good question. Any other themes out there you're seeing, Kristen?
I feel like I've been able to answer all of these questions.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
We have a lot of clients that are getting 100% disability for their VA. Should they protest as well, even though really they don't have? No.
It's the only person that I don't believe actually should protest at all. I mean,
Even if
they're
it's not
completely covered.
100%?
So if you're under 100% disability, then there is a scale in which they give you credits on your tax appraisals, your assessed values. So we can still save money for the under 100% disabled
Okay.
exemption.
It's kind of
folks.
like that $40,000 credit would just be another.
Yeah, and if you're 70, it's, I don't know, I don't remember what it is. Every county's a little different, but if
Yeah,
you're
I know.
70%, it's like 20 grand. If you're 50%, it's 15 grand. They kind of have a sliding scale.
So anything under 100, they should, but if they're over, if they are 100%, almost.
God bless our veterans.
Ross has asked, this is maybe case by case, but can you pay for the service out of the escrow account?
No,
I didn't think
not
so.
at this time.
How do we sign up, Craig?
HometaxShield.com. Find your address. And finish the sign up. That's it.
And I think if the Williams team has a link, we can give
Yeah,
that
you
to
can
our
post- yeah,
clients,
you'll have
and
a
it's $15 for the first year instead of 30.
Yes, that's true.
Yep.
We have a special partnership. So if you are gonna hire them to help you, we're gonna share the,
Absolutely.
Good deal.
Share the Williams team link. And then that gives you a 50% discount for the first year. Because there's so many people out there that have never done this, never tried. And we want them to try it and experience us. And we got a great web portal that gives you full transparency and control over everything. And so forth. And so, yeah, make it super simple.
One last question. So you said 45 counties in Texas, but you are national. So if we have,
We're not national, we're
You're not.
just in Texas.
okay, all right. Never mind.
But the escrow thing is very confusing. There's two other confusing things I'll hit on real quick about protesting. That I think even a homeowner that protests themselves might get confused about. A lot of people incorrectly conclude that if I protest and get a reduction, then my taxes are going to go down from last year. That can happen, but because values are going up every year, when you get a reduction, the reduction is not off of last year's value. The reduction is off of the notice value that you just got, which is up from last year. So we saved people a lot of money, but their taxes still went up, and then their escrows still went up, and they got confused. And so sometimes your escrows go up because even though we saved you money, you're paying less taxes than you would have. Other times, we saved you money, and your escrow company looked at the next year and forecasted your taxes to go up, so they want to raise your mortgage payment. So the escrow thing is it's a confusing part of property taxes for us because we save people a lot of money every year, and sometimes they can't see it because it's lost in that escrow world, but it's there. You're paying a lower tax bill when you get a reduction.
Super helpful.
Yeah.
okay, I have one more question on here. Let me find it from Derek McDaniel. Thank you for asking this question, Derek, because it is kind of confusing. Let me find it. So many questions. There's a lot of questions in this chat. He said they have a rental property and the assessed value went down from 2022, but the mortgage company monthly estimate for escrow went sky high. Why would that happen? Do you know the answer to that? Or maybe Monica, our lender partner?
It all depends on what the mortgage company is seeing. There could be a shortfall in his account, number one. If there's a shortfall in his account relative to what the mortgage company from a compliance standpoint is required to collect, then they have to fix that, and they fix that by raising your payment. That's one answer. The other answer would be the mortgage company does a forecast for next year and wants to make sure that they're escrowing enough for him every month. And they may look forward and say, holy cow, Texas's market's off the charts. We've got to collect a lot more property taxes. So let's raise it. So it's one of those two things most likely that drives that.
Okay. Okay, I don't know that I have the link on hand that I can copy and paste. Do you have it, Gina?
I do.
I just want to chat, I want to copy this link into the chat
Yeah.
for everyone that's in the
Totally.
chat who's like hot to do it right now if you wanted to sign up.
Yes.
But we will send out the slides. We will send out, right, slides?
I haven't redacted a lot of the stuff I don't want to send out, but we'll send out some of the basics.
Okay, some of the basics. And then at least you'll get this video because we'll send out it's been recording.
Yep.
We'll send this recording out and then the link and a follow-up.
I just texted it to you.
Hold on, friends on.
So Corey, if we had a client that used a professional company last year and I had this happen, he's probably on there. Their escrow apparently was pretty short this year. Do we just talk to the company or is that kind of more what you're saying where that still can happen even if it helps, saves money on taxes?
Yeah, we haven't found any success in trying to talk to the mortgage or escrow companies about
Okay.
the taxes, because they have their own rules and compliance procedures that they have to follow. And, I found that a lot of them operate very differently. So kind of depends on how they operate. But, once we get a reduction, and that reduction, which we usually get in June, July, maybe August timeframe, that technically that reduction doesn't become official or certified until September, October.
Okay.
So that mortgage company, if they're going around looking for what's the latest, they won't see that until September, October, when right before the tax bills come out, then they would see that.
Okay, because they closed in 2021 and he's talking about escrow being short this year.
That's not too surprising.
Okay.
That means that,
I'm just wondering if it's on trend,
yeah, we had unfortunately a lot of customers who got pretty big increases in their escrow the last 6 months. Yeah, that bought in 2021 or early 2022, had their escrow set up according to a certain outcome. That outcome was a lot different. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, but I'm one personal example. When Home Tax Shield protested my home a few years ago, and got a really nice sizable reduction, even though I had homestead, I not only got a check back from my mortgage company because I was over escrowed at that point in time, but they lowered my payment. So I was like, yes, that's what we want to see.
I got
Okay.
that this year.
Casey, you got that too?
$1,200 check.
Yeah, that feels good.
Feels like free money.
But it was 4 years in the making.
It was.
It took a few years to get there.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we have the hardest time talking with people about protesting, and whether you do it yourself or do it with us. 7 years of Texas history, 70 to 72% success rate for folks that protest. So 7 out of 10 times, you're going to get a reduction of some kind. It might be smaller than you want, but you're going to get something. But that means that 30% of the time, for the average protester, you're not going to get anything, right? We have an 82% success rate, so we're a little above average, which is great. But statistically, it's not possible to get a big reduction every single year. It's just mathematically not even possible.
Anybody with investment properties or vacation homes, second homes, no doubt, 100%
Yes.
protest for sure.
No exemptions there. Yep. And I feel for the renters out there right now too, because I had a big landlord up in the Killeen area, and she's darn near cash flow negative every month now. She can't raise the rent enough to compensate for the property taxes. And so she's gonna sell her whole portfolio. Like, I don't know why we keep these negative every month.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping the legislature does something to help the renters too, not just us that have homestead, because we all kind of need a little relief.
Yeah, it's kind of gotten out of hand. So it's gonna pass on to the consumer,
Yes, it does.
always does,
It
so,
does.
okay.
I mean,
I'm gonna say goodbye to everybody on Zoom.
Thank you. Good job.
Yes, thank you all for all your questions. It's been a really great afternoon. You know, we've learned a lot. We didn't get that, we don't have a specific link to share out in the chat. I will make sure that y'all get a this video and that link tomorrow in an email. We have all of your emails from the registration. So just look out for that today or tomorrow.
Yep.
Okay, happy Wednesday.
Yep.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you all.
Good job.
Yes, you did good. That was super.
Good, helpful.